Welcome to Elma Wine and Liquor. I'm Tim. Today I am here with Nick from RNDC Spirits, which is a distributor here in New York State, where my store is located. We are here today to taste through a lineup of Yellowstone bourbons. These come from the Limestone Branch Distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky, which is just a little bit south of Bardstown, which is the kind of the founding place or the kind of mecca of bourbon, Bardstown, Kentucky. This distillery is owned by Stephen Beam, who you might recognize that last name from another big brand out there. He is a descendant of the Beam family, and his wife's family also has descendants from another big distilling family as well. So he opened this distillery a couple decades ago, and has been bringing new life back to old brands like Yellowstone. So let Nick jump in a little bit here and talk about the Yellowstone brand.
Absolutely. And like you said, I believe Stephen Beam brought the distillery back in 2010, so they've had a good amount of time. And he comes from that big Beam family of distilling and aging bourbon whiskey in Kentucky. So, you know, like you mentioned as well, 1872, Yellowstone National Park was founded. Just so happens that 1872, Yellowstone whiskey was also founded too. And
it didn't just so happen. It was one of his descendants who was owned a distillery at the time that just launched a new brand. And since the park had just opened, they decided to call this new brand Yellowstone Bourbon in honor of that park.
Exactly.
And even today, they donate money to the Yellowstone Park or the National Parks Foundation for every bottle sold.
This isn't your normal bottle here too, so this is an edition that came out last year. They like to pay kind of credence to that, and that is part of their fabric in Yellowstone too. So sometimes they'll come out with different labels that pay respects to the national park system and how important it is to this country, and they like to have that right on the front, so it's loud and clear.
Yep. So I guess with that, let's pour first one, and I'll just share a little bit. I just got back from Limestone Branch Distilling a few weeks ago. That was my third trip to the distillery. It's a fantastic place. You know, so even though Stephen Beam is a descendant of the Beam family legacy, this is his own project. Very small, family-run distillery, handful of employees, just very relaxed, nice atmosphere, kind of like our store is, which is probably why we gel so well together. And we go down there to buy single barrels of Yellowstone, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it's just a great distillery, great atmosphere there, and they make incredible whiskey.
And they're constantly changing their ideas too. They've got some really cool additions in the lineup right now that we're going to get through. You mentioned the single barrel. This one you've had in the store for a little while too. This is their toasted edition. They also have one that's a rum barrel finish, and then they have their single malt over here too. So playing with some different styles of mash bills and grains that they're using. This first one we're trying right now is their 93 proof. So this is their bourbon. In the mash bill, we're looking at 75% corn. We have 13% rye and then 12% malted barley. And you really smell all three of them when you're getting a nice sniff on that too. It's a 4-year-old base that they're using for these three first whiskeys right here. They also blend this with a 7-year-old whiskey as well. So you get a little bit more of that age to that first one. The other ones have a different kind of style that we'll get to in a little bit too.
Yeah. This is a nice nose, not overpowering in any one regard, just kind of very subtle, a little bit of citrus, a little bit of toffee, a little bit of caramel, tiny bit of spice, very mellow palate, easy drinking with a little bit of layered spice in there. Great cocktail bourbon. You can definitely sip it on its own or on the rocks, but you can also whip up a nice cocktail with this as well. This does have a special label on it, but you will see the regular Yellowstone on most store shelves. And it's
available here too every day too.
It's at a great price.
Just everyday drinking, delicious whiskey. Like you said, it's got that really nice blend of all three of those different ingredients in the mash bill. And
Yep.
good age statement too.
Yep.
Readily available. So we're going from that 93 proof, we're getting up to 100 proof. We're moving over to the toasted barrel here. So this is, like I said, the 4-year-old whiskey that they use for the Yellowstone as a base, and then they age this for a little bit longer in what they call, it's a number 3 char barrel. So it's just toasted, it's not completely burnt, like it doesn't look like charcoal, more of like toast on that middle setting in your toaster at home. And we like that because it kind of smooths out the bourbon a little bit, gives it a really nice finish. And, you know, it still stays with that same mash bill, but you're just getting a little bit, you know, oak gives it a lot of different flavor too. So even on the nose, you smell that.
You get a lot more sugar, caramelized sugar on the nose with this one. And even though it's a bit higher proof than the other one, it doesn't, already on the nose, it doesn't smell as high.
Exactly. And when you're really toasting these barrels, what you're doing is extracting that sugar content from the actual oak. And that does reflect in the actual whiskey too. That's where you get some of that sweetness too outside of the actual corn, and it's reflected right in here.
Get a nice layer of vanilla in there, and it somehow enhances that spice from the rye as well, which really becomes much more prominent in this. Could just be because of the higher proof point as well, which is something to keep in mind when you see a higher proof bourbon on the shelf, particularly 100, and start going higher from that. The way that distillers get bourbon down to 93 or 90 or 80 proof, what sometimes you see on the shelf in the store, is they're just adding water to that finished product. So in order to showcase the full breadth of flavors in the bourbon, a lot of distillers like to bottle a little bit higher, and then you can choose to water it down yourself to whatever level you want to get the flavors and the feel, the mouthfeel, the alcohol that you would like.
Exactly. It's funny too when you look at the name of the actual distillery, Limestone Branch. The reason that Kentucky is really well known for its water sourcing is because it sits on this limestone branch in Kentucky, and limestone generally filters water to have a very good flavor to it, and it's very just strong in the right, micronutrients that are in there too. So it makes a big difference.
Well, that's a really nice bourbon. The toasted barrels I've been enjoying a lot personally myself lately. That sweetness up front, and then that from this one in particular, that spice on the back end just really well balanced.
Lingers very nicely.
Good quality.
So we're kind of moving over to this next one too. This is the rum barrel finish. This is another one too, using that 4-year-old mash bill right here. It's just aged for 4 years and finished in 9 weeks of an ex-rum barrel from Havana in Cuba.
So with finishes, when you hear somebody refer to a bourbon being finished, or any scotch or whatever, finished in this type of barrel, like I said earlier, bourbon has to be aged in new charred American oak barrels. There's no set time limit, but there are time limits that they can put different words on the label. We won't get into that today. Definitely subscribe for a future video on that. But the finish means that after that new charred American oak barrel, it is put into a different type of barrel. That can be a rum barrel in this case, port wine barrels, other bourbon barrels. Anything is possible with the finishing barrels, but it had to have at least been sometime in a new American charred oak barrel. And in this case, it's been at least 4 years, and then went into these rum barrels.
What that really does, it just kind of changes that overall flavor of the whiskey, and they only finish it. They don't age it for a long time usually, because you don't want that overwhelming flavor to be the secondary barrel. You want that to kind of complement what the actual whiskey is tasting like in the first place. And with this, you do get a little bit of that sweetness from the rum, but it doesn't take over that, really nice flavor again from that first whiskey right here either. Just kind of makes it a little bit different, and that's kind of the reason you want to go and try those, because it is that signature kind of Yellowstone flavor too.
Exactly. And I'll just touch on something Nick said with over finishing a barrel, bottle, or type of whiskey. One thing that you see in tequila specifically is that the añejos and extra añejos, which are aged for a very long time in ex-bourbon barrels, start to take on the characteristics of bourbon. And some of the extra añejos, if you tasted them blind, you might even think that they're bourbon because they have so much influence from that bourbon. So you don't want to finish them too long with the bourbon if you want to maintain that bourbon characteristic to it. This definitely has that rum presence to it. I lived in a country that was very well known for rum for a while, and I drank quite a bit of it. Have a fondness for rum, and this has just enough subtle rum taste without being overpoweringly sweet, which rums tend to be for me now. That just gives it that nice balance. You get that extra little caramel molasses on the nose, some of that subtle sweetness on the palate, but it's still a nice bite on the finish that lets me know it's bourbon.
I love the tropical flavors you get from it too. That really you can really tell that there's rum that was interacting with the whiskey too. I always get like that kind of tropical notes or banana, and this has a little bit of both too. And it's subtle. It's not like you have to kind of search for it a little bit, but it's really there, and that's why I really like it too.
Yeah, definitely. Great product. This is very new for their lineup in particular at this point, but I'm looking forward to more different finishes from them.
Absolutely, and I like to bring out these new releases to you because I know you really appreciate them and love to talk about them with you too. So this is very fresh out there right now. You want to talk about this one a little bit too? This is one of our favorites.
Yeah, so this, we're going to get into our single barrel. So I will do another whole series of videos on single barrels, store picks, and what exactly that means. But just as a high-level overview, myself, staff, and customers went down to Limestone Branch Distilling. We sat with this one we sat with Stephen Beam, or one of them we sat with Stephen Beam. We've done 4 barrels now from there. We sit with the staff or Stephen Beam or one of his other top guys and taste 3 different barrels, all at 3 different proofs. So 9 different samples. And then we collectively talk and decide on the best expression of those 9. And that barrel is barreled just for us at that proof that we picked. So you will never get that exact same flavor profile ever again, other than in the 200-ish bottles we got from that barrel.
You fit it usually to your own taste preferences, those of your customers, the ones that you know that really appreciate the same kind of style that you do. And with that, you get a lot of the flavor profiles that you're looking for too. When you're tasting at 3 different proofs, you really can kind of hone in on the flavors and the age statement especially that goes into it. But I've been a fan of this one ever since you brought it back. I'm looking forward to the future ones that were going to be coming this way.
Yeah, so this one, these barrel picks have been some of my favorite bourbons, hands down, over the last few years. A lot of times I get asked often, what's your favorite wine? What's your favorite bourbon? I usually don't have a specific answer, but this would always be in one of my top favorites, depending on my mood, depending on what I'm looking for that evening. The thing about this one is it has a ton of spice, ton of baking spices. Very wintry whiskey for me, just that clove and cinnamon and nutmeg, just kind of all sitting there, reminds me of Christmas, winter, snuggled up in front of the fire. Just great product, and I might be slightly biased, but it's a great product from Yellowstone to start with, and then we just happen to pick the one that we like the best.
I think you said it before earlier too, it just gives you that nice Kentucky hug when you take a sip too. It's really nice, the spiciness, but definitely reminds me of sitting next to a fire and just, And
that is 115 proof, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes.
Which it doesn't feel like that when you take a sip. Even if you were a novice whiskey drinker just for the first time, feel a little bit hot, but it's very, very mellow for that, having that much alcohol in it.
Just so much flavor to it.
Yeah. And then what do we got next?
So after that, we're finished with the bourbons. We're still in whiskey, but this is another project from the distillery here. This is their single malt American whiskey. And when you're looking at single malt whiskeys, you've probably heard of all the different Scotches and Irish whiskeys that are being produced, but the U.S. has a few different expressions of our own. So single malt is malted barley, and this is distilled down to, we're at 108 proof right here, so you're at 54% alcohol. It's kind of at that similar proof to what you're seeing a lot of Scotch. Sometimes you'll see it at 46% alcohol, sometimes you'll see a little bit hotter. But this one, super interesting. It's such a departure from the whiskeys we were just trying too. It's got a little bit more of that kind of, less of that funky style, but more of that kind of graininess that you get from it, a little bit touch sweetness.
Yeah, just a note on single malt whiskeys in general in America, it is becoming a bigger category over time. I think as with a lot of things, there's been a lot of hype behind it in the industry for quite some number of years. It still hasn't really caught on the consumer side. Malted barley is a little bit more of a unique animal than the 51% corn mash bills that a lot of Americans are accustomed to. But it's, very grainy, green, grassy on the nose, which is a little bit, no, not a little bit, it's very different than what we've just been drinking here. And then it's going to change on the palate as well.
Yeah, but in the same vein, it's still 4 years old. You are getting the right amount of age to this too. And with that, this does pair a lot differently. So, I mean, if you're looking at this, you could give it a splash of water too to bring it down to a little lower proof. But for people like you and me, I think we like it right at, this proof right here.
Yeah, it's definitely hot, not super hot, but that graininess is definitely predominant on this one. Like I said, it is a growing category in the U.S. I think they're going to get better and better, and there's going to be a lot of uniqueness between the regions of the U.S., just like there is in Scotland between the Highlands and Isles and Lowlands, Spaysides. We're going to see Kentucky single malts, Virginia single malts. We already are Oregon single malts that all have their own unique character identities.
Yeah, and even with this too, you're tasting it. I think a lot of people, when they think of Scotch, think of that peaty Islay kind of style where it has like a campfire flavor. This isn't like that at all. It's got a lot of that kind of like almost banana, like green banana, a little bit underripe. Just really nice flavor, tropical, but also just tasty in general.
Yeah, a little grassiness and earthiness in it too. So that's our lineup from Limestone Branch Distilling today, the Yellowstone bourbons and single malt whiskey. Really appreciate you taking the time to watch. Really thank you for your time, Nick.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me today, Tim.
Samples.
Of course.
And look forward to hearing your questions, comments, anything else you want to know. Happy to share it with you. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.
Cheers.